Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 116, Practical SVG. I'm your host this week, Danny Blue, and with me as always is Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
And Leon Rebel.
Hello, everyone.
And this week we have, again, a very special guest. I will eventually stop making that kind of joke thing. It's really bad. I'm so sorry, everyone. Yeah, everybody's special. Sorry. I'm so sorry, guys. All right, but anyway, we have a very special guest this week who we've had on before. It's been quite a while, but everybody say hello to Chris Coyier.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Hey, Danny, Leon, Justin. It's a pleasure to be back.
Awesome. We've missed you. There's been a little Chris Coyier shaped hole in all of our hearts.
Oh, I miss you too.
So for anybody that's not familiar with you or any of your work, give us your quick background, your quick elevator pitch.
Oh, sure. I can make it super quick. I mostly do three things on the web. Most of my time is working on CodePen, which is like an in-app or like in-browser code editor kind of thing, social network for front-end developer designer types. All the stuff I do is I kind of live on the web. Web's kind of my thing, especially front-end design and dev stuff. And so I have my own podcast about that as well with my friend Dave Rupert. It's called ShopTalk Show. And then I also have a blog. I don't even know what to call it. I've never had a good elevator pitch but it's css-tricks.com, in which I write about web, but there's forums there and videos and an almanac and stuff, and that's just a ton of content about front-end web design and development primarily. So all the things I do are centered around front-end design and development, and also have a recent book. So I think that was the part of the impetus behind inviting me to this show. So I think we're going to talk about SVG a bit, but yeah, I have a brand new book called Practical SVG. I'd hold it up if I had a copy, but sadly I'm on the road. Didn't bring it. It's a very nice blue though. Easy to remember title, Practical SVG.
So you're new to the web then. You're just a brand new developer out there.
So you Google anything about CSS, and of course CSS Tricks shows up. So
yeah, and I think that's where most of our listeners are probably, if they don't know your name directly, like they've at least referenced something on CSS Tricks that has gotten them out of some sort of terrible jam. But
yeah,
also,
I've started thinking of it as a little bit like a car mechanic kind of thing, because I get that fairly often from folks like, "Wow, you really saved my butt." You know, I'm kind of like, "Oh wow." I mean, I don't know. Apparently, you had a boss that we're just about to fire you, but you Googled just the right thing, and I got you out of it, and it feels good. You know, kind of like a.
If nothing else, look up the Flexbox documentation tutorial stuff on CSS Tricks.
I just did some updates to that the other day, just minor stuff, you know, because I know how important that one is to some people. That I like. First of all, I don't want to change it too much because apparently the recipe is just right, so I don't want to rethink it or anything, because that page does well for us. Unfortunately, I use so much of the screen space on that page for explaining stuff that it's actually a little light on advertising. So.
Everybody appreciates that one. The other thing you mentioned was CodePen. For anybody that's listened to the show for a while, the last time we had you on, it was to talk about CodePen. So I'll go back. I do not remember what number it was, but go back and listen to that episode, and also just check out some CodePen stuff. All right, so just like you said, we wanted to bring you here largely to talk about your new book and talk about SVG. So same as the title of the show, your new book is called Practical SVG. So I want to be really, really brief here. We kind of want to assume that everybody at least has a somewhat of an understanding of what an SVG is. But could you give us like a brief overview of what SVG is for the web?
Yeah, I mean, the acronym, which you just have to say every time, it's a pretty good acronym for the web. Scalable Vector Graphics. Yeah, I even like that scalable is the first thing, because that's one of the primary benefits of it. But we did just a tiny bit of pre-show in which that we were trying to figure out the history of SVG a little bit, because we all are a little murky on that, including me. I'm not like I wasn't around for the invention of SVG. I have no I have no say in SVG's future or anything like that, but it's fun to think about like what life was like back then, or whatever, what the times were like when SVG was invented. But as far as I understand it, it was kind of like, it sure is compelling to be able to describe graphics with like geometry and math and numbers and stuff, instead of I have this circle I want to show and I need 50,000 pixels in order to describe it, because it's like some of those are transparent and some of those are orange or whatever. I can just say like, how about hey computer, why don't you draw a circle that's this wide or whatever, and has a center right over here. Like to describe that through geometry just takes a few bytes of code. To describe that through on and off pixel values, it's just a ton of code. So I think that at least some of the spirit of SVG is like, can we draw by describing what we're trying to draw? It would be efficient in doing that. And because we can do it that way, I mean, that's what vector graphics is. You get the S part of SVG, you get the scalable part, meaning that it doesn't matter where or how big I draw this thing. It could be the size of a billboard, and because it's just math drawing it, it's as kind of as sharp as it can be. That's just like, if that's all you know about SVG, which there's a lot more to know about, that's like the most compelling part. It's that it's this way to draw things with math.
Yeah, I remember the first time. So when I was in college, and we were being told the difference between and so of course, it's pretty much, if you think of it, if nothing else, it's the difference. It's the output of Photoshop and the output of Illustrator. Like if that's your world, that's
another great way to describe it. Yeah,
it's a pretty easy way to differentiate. But I remember asking, because they were like, SVGs, you can make them big, you can make them small. It doesn't matter, all with the same stuff. And I remember just trying to be well, like why does that happen? And all my professors were just like, it's just a lot of math. Just acknowledge that it's a lot of math and move on. But yeah, so
well, it came into light again more recently, because it's like, I don't know, we all got pretty comfortable with using not vector graphics on the web. The browser support history of SVG is a mixed past and is kind of complicated and stuff. And for at least most of our careers, I bet it wasn't a go-to reach to format. It was like, nah, because I don't know, maybe people need a weird browser plugin for it to work, or like it just didn't like settle into the education of the web, and it wasn't like developers weren't like building muscle memory on it like they were with JPEG. Open the thing and cut it out in Photoshop and save for web and optimize it. It's like something like JPEGs and pings and stuff are just part of our muscle memory as web developers, and SVG just isn't, and yet anyway. I think it's building a bit, but it started to become more so because of the kind of like the retina apocalypse of graphics, kind of like that changed a lot of stuff. All of a sudden companies started shipping monitors that had higher pixel density. And it was like, oh crap, I mean, you double the pixel density of a monitor, and now there's ones that are in between 1x and 2x, and there's ones that are even more than 2x, and there's 5K displays, and surely that's not a problem. It's kind of awesome because of how awesome they look. But raster graphics does not scale very well right there. If you just focus on 2x displays to get a graphic that looks exactly the same as it does before, it's 4x the amount of pixels. And 4x when you're talking about pixels it's a 4x hit in bandwidth and download time and stuff. That conversation was happening at the exact same time as web developers were like, we need to start taking performance more seriously. Like, websites are slow, we're losing ground to native apps. The web performance conversation, it's almost at fever pitch right now. When those two things collide, it's like, oh gosh, now we have this format that all of a sudden is supported in a lot more browsers than it ever used to be. We're caring about performance a lot more than we used to be, and all of a sudden there's this tool we can reach for that has these tiny little graphics that can benefit performance while looking great and while serving it. So if an 8x display drops tomorrow, what we have to do is nothing because it's already a handled problem. That's super compelling.
You've mentioned browser support a few times there. Could you give us a bit of insight into kind of what platforms support SVG nowadays? And is it a problem with platform support, or kind of what's the story
in my life, for the most part, it's like I hardly even think about it ever at all. And that may not be fair, because the trouble is, like so many things in the web, that it's super nuanced, right? There isn't just a yes or no answer to is SVG supported in this browser or not. There's lots of like micro features of SVG. If it's kind of like, I want to cut out, like, I don't know. I always think it's funny to like look at and poke around the website of the people that I'm talking with at the moment. You guys have little squares that represent each episode, right? Like the Web Platform Podcast, number 27 is when we talked about CodePen. And there's a little graphic that has the CodePen logo and has the number 27 and stuff. It's funny because, like, it's not not blaming you necessarily, but it could be SVG. It's the kind of graphic that's got some text in it. It's like there's nothing in there that's raster. It's like it could kind of be SVG. If it was SVG, you created that in Illustrator or whatever, and saved as SVG, and you just used it on the website in the same exact way that you're using it now. Image source equals blah 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 dot SVG. The browser support for that is like pretty great. It's like I wouldn't worry about almost anything in that case. There's littler stuff like I'm gonna develop an SVG icon system, and I'm gonna make all my icons these symbol elements, which is this really cool thing that SVG can do that's detailed in the book. And I'm doing that because I want to have this one file that represents all of my icons on the page, like an icon font or a CSS sprite. It's just the SVG version of like being really efficient with icons. I think it's a great way to go. Well, then I'm going to put that file on my server somewhere, and I'm going to reference the file path to that with a use tag in SVG. So like you don't need to know much about this, but oh, hey, that's a cool little technique. Like that works in most things, but like not in IE anything. Which is like, oh shoot, so that's tricky, or if it's like I want to put interactivity in my SVG but still link it up as an image tag. Well, the browser support for that is a little different in different browsers. And I want to animate parts of an SVG from CSS specifically using transforms. Well, that weird combination has a little bit of different browser support. So I don't mean to scare you away. The most basic usage of SVG has like pretty awesome browser support. When you get into little nuanced things, there's differences. And I've written about all that. There's a lot in the book. There's always a way to deal with the support. Like if the answer is no, the browser I'm in doesn't support that, there's always a way to have a kind of acceptable fallback to that if you are willing to do the work to do it.
Cool. So there's a relatively easy story there for fallbacks and those kind of things with the parts that you can't kind of support in some of the browsers.
I'd say relatively easy is a good way to put it. Sometimes it's tremendously easy. Sometimes it's just, oh, I see, it's not supported, so use a PNG instead, or whatever. And sometimes it's more nuanced than that. But yeah, there's information to be found about that everywhere. And I have a kind of seminal article on SVG fallback situations on CSS tricks should it need to be referenced. But it certainly is more comfortable to use SVG when you don't have to think about that stuff, where you're like, looks like I'm just going to do nothing, because why not?
Cool, thanks.
That's I think that's pretty fair. Browser support's always tricky with stuff. Justin, do you want to say something?
Well, I mean, if historically, why didn't SVG? I mean, the spec's been around for a long time, but IE up until what, 9? I mean, 9 I believe got SVG support. Anything pre-9 didn't. So you had this big gap where it wasn't that the spec wasn't there. I mean, you had browsers that started to support bits and pieces of it. A lot of the WebKit-ish stuff had general support for, I think, v1.1, but it wasn't all the way there. And until IE, which had such huge market share early on in the sort of mid portion of the 2000s, we couldn't use it. Like you could use it to the Adobe plugin. Like Adobe had a plugin for IE that I recall you could do some crazy stuff with. But we had a gap, right? It wasn't that, to Chris's point, right? Rasterization back then wasn't even better. Like, yeah, we didn't have to deal with many screen sizes, but at the same time, like, if you wanted to do scalable sort of things, there were all kinds of tricks you had to use to make sure you just had quite the right balance of it. These days, we kind of live in a much more happier utopia where things have, or at least get talked about a lot more. I mean, the SVG sort of side of life, has been pretty decent from a static standpoint. I mean, how does it look from an animation standpoint? I mean, there's been a lot of talk around SVG and, the sort of animation portions of it that don't get as much play. but now we have the web animations APIs that can replace some of the things that we do with SVG today. It's
probably,
yeah, we hope, there's a hope, but at the same time, we don't have all of those things.
I mean, if you want to get into some nuanced stuff, there's we alluded to how complicated SVG is, and it is big. So, we started talking about, okay, it's this way of drawing stuff with math, but but you can put raster graphics inside SVG as well. You can set type in SVG. You can do animation in SVG. There's a lot of stuff that SVG can do. It's kind of like just a generic format for describing how something looks. A big part of SVG used to be this thing called SMILE, S-M-I-L, which is some, I used to have it memorized. Whatever. It means interactivity in SVG. And it's this weird thing that's like, we're going to rip it out. We're not going to rip it out. We're going to never support it. Oh, maybe we will support it. And across the browser landscape, it's a complicated little battle for what's going to happen to SMILE. At this point, I'm still kind of sticking to the guns of like, maybe just don't use it. It seems a little at risk. There's not a whole heck of a lot that it can do that you can't use something else for if you absolutely had to, kind of thing. Yeah, but what does animation look like across? It is a little complicated, but there's libraries and stuff that normalize it a little bit. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that necessarily, other than like, yes, it's complicated, but yes, there's always a way.
Well, there's practicality, right? I mean, we can sit here and I'm as guilty as anyone when it comes to sort of the things that we specify and sort of design and build for the web. But practicality speaking, it's significantly easier to get started with SVG today than it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago.
I hope so, yeah.
And I think that actually brought up, Justin, you just said practicality, and that's again, the name of the book is Practical SVG. So as we're starting to go down like the rabbit hole a little bit of like some of the nuances and getting into some more things. Can you just kind of like what does that mean? Is it just the type? Is it just the title of the book, or what does Practical SVG mean?
Yeah. Well, it means that we've gone down so many rabbit holes already. You don't have to go down any of those rabbit holes as someone who wants to take advantage of SVG. If what you're compelled by is, if I used a lot of these for graphics around my website, that it's gonna be a faster website because the files are going to be smaller. It's going to look sharper, and like I said, if an 8x display dropped tomorrow, I won't have to do anything for it. It's a more future-friendly kind of website. If that's what you're compelled by SVG, which is super compelling, and I wouldn't blame you to be compelled by that like I want you to have that as your developer muscle memory. When it comes time to like, I'm converting a design over into a website, I want you to stop and be like, oh, that's a moment in which I could use SVG, so I'm going to do it. I'm gonna just do it. And that, I guess that's what I mean by practical, is that this book doesn't dive into the really nitty-gritty nuances or the history of SVG and like the fires in which it was born and like really specific animation differences between one browser and rendering detail and stuff. I mean, you could write SVG is just as complicated as HTML but this isn't about that. It's just like, you're just a front-end developer and you want to make better websites. What's some simple stuff you can do to get started and start building that muscle memory? So it's like that's how I use SVG. So that's, like I don't even know about most of that stuff. We were talking a little bit before the show about the history, and I'm like, well, apparently it came from Adobe in the early days. And I'm like, really? Cool, good to know. I wasn't around. I don't even remember those days. I don't remember the formats that predate it. I'm just a guy who wants his graphics to look good on his site for the most part. So hopefully it's like not scary at all. The kind of book is like, hopefully it presents it in a way that's like, I could do that. No big deal.
So who's the book aimed at? Just all front end developers? Anybody that wants to get going with SVGs, or is it for more kind of advanced people? Or
yeah, I would say that it shouldn't be the first book you buy about web development. I mean, it's a little bit more niche than that.
Yeah.
Sure, and also not like I'm a high end animator and I'm switching from Flash to SVG. Is this the book for me? No, it doesn't get into that kind of detail. I'm not sure there is a perfect book for you yet. It's more like I can bum around the web all day long, clicking links, looking at 150 websites a day, just in my day-to-day clicking around of clicking on stuff from Facebook and Twitter and just bouncing around doing Google searches stuff. All the sites I land on, I'm like, is that SVG? Nope. Could have been. Nope. There's just a billion examples of developers that don't have the muscle memory of using SVG yet. Yeah. People just aren't reaching for it, despite ridiculous advantages in doing it. And I'm kind of like on that fight. Like, there's parallels in web performance. Like if you're gonna go to a conference and read and have somebody be like, here's 10 things you can do for web performance. Or you read some blog post like that, there's these easy wins, right? Or there's easy wins like, do you have gzipping turned on your server? Because if you don't, you're just throwing away web performance. It's a one-liner to change, and it makes a huge difference in web performance. Are you running your JPEGs through like JPEG Optim or Img Optim or some kind of thing like that? Because if you're not, you're just throwing away web performance. You can just take all the images on your web server, run them through an image optimizer, and you're just getting some performance just for free. SVG can be kind of like that. If there's a graphic that could have been SVG but it isn't, you're just getting some performance and good looks and future-proofness just for free.
Are there any performance implications of using SVGs at all, or is it all just kind of good news? Or could I
think there probably is some.
Yeah.
Like really performance-minded people think about like, I don't know how much you dig into animation, but it's like, let's say you have a div and you're trying to slide it across the screen, right? The prevailing wisdom right now is like, don't animate like margin left. Don't animate like performance or like position relative and then animate the left property, because it's not like cool browser optimized. It's not gonna send it to the GPU or the fancy things that it does. You should use transform translate X to do that. Well, even if you do use a transform on SVG, I don't think you get the GPU action. It's not to say that you can't, there's no way to make an SVG animation perform it, but I don't think it's like browsers have put the time necessarily into it quite yet. Like, I don't know, like getting SVG animations on the GPU, I'm not even sure if it's really possible yet. I think it's likely in the future, but it's not from an animation perspective, it's not an automatic win, I think. Although I gotta say, when you use like a library like GreenSock or something to animate SVG, they're doing what they can to make it look really nice. And generally, I look at a GreenSock animation and I'm like, dude, that's smooth as butter. So, cool, looking pretty good.
Yeah. So I'm kind of going to switch two questions together. Are there, so SVGs aren't, so they're markup, but they're not HTML, right? Like,
that's how I explained it too. Like, it's XML, but like actually XML. Like when people call HTML XML, it kind of isn't for some reason. That's a nuanced thing. But there's angle brackets, there's attributes with values, and sometimes there's stuff within those angle bracket tags. So like it looks a heck of a lot like HTML, and it looks so much like HTML that you can put it in HTML, and that's okay too. So like whatever nuances there are, it's might as well just be HTML.
Okay, so with that, are there a couple things that a lot of people worry about or should be concerned about when they're dealing with HTML is accessibility and SEO stuff. Are there any accessibility or SEO concerns to think about when using SVGs? I mean, I'm assuming don't create the entire website as one big SVG, which actually seems like it would be possible, but I don't think it would be a good idea.
Probably not, and I think the limiting factors would be like, for example, you can set text. You can set real accessible, quote-unquote, text in SVG through literally a text element. And it's selectable, it's searchable, it's copy and pastable. It's just web text, only you've told it where exactly to be. But it can't wrap, at least in SVG 1.1 or whatever, which is looking like it might be where SVG ends, which is another story. But anyway, like a paragraph tag in HTML. It gets as far as it can get in its container, and it wraps down to the next line and keeps writing and stuff. That's not something that you can do in SVG. So that would be like hugely limiting factor for setting an entire website in SVG. Not to mention that that's the only tag that can render text. I mean, there's a couple sub-elements of text like tspan and stuff, which allows you to move things around and stuff. But for the most part, if you want to set text in SVG, you get the text element, which it is accessible in the sense that, you know, a screen reader can read it, and like text in a JPEG, they absolutely can't unless you provide alt text or whatever. But it's not the same kind of experience. Versus HTML, in which you have a whole set of header tags, and you have lists, and you have definition lists, and you have just a ton of HTML tags specifically for text that have inherent meaning and are useful to screen readers. And that, you know, they tab to a list, and it's like, this is a list. It has 5 items in it. And you tab, this is the first item in that list. Let me read it to you. You know, those kind of concepts don't exist in SVG, which might be a bummer. Maybe those will come someday. I don't know if that's appropriate or not in SVG land. I can't necessarily speak to that. But for the most part, people think of SVG as an accessibility win, because it's usually replacing something that's less accessible. It's replacing a chart that's a PNG with a chart that's an SVG that has some interactability. It has the ability to tab over to a bar in that chart and have it explain what that bar is and what the value of that bar is, and has some text that you can copy and paste, has some things that you can find on the page. And accessibility is more than just screen readers too. It has to do with the visual sharpness of things. Like having a really sharp chart on a screen is better than a tiny little JPEG that got blown up or is being looked at on a 2.5x display, so it's a little fuzzy. Somebody's got fuzzy eyesight to begin with. It's not helping the situation. You know, the word accessibility means a heck of a lot. But even just focusing on the screen reader thing, there's big wins there. Let's say your company uses icon fonts, which just tons of websites do. It's just a very popular way to use icons on a website. To do that in a way that's really, truly a good, accessible experience is a little complicated, and most sites don't. If you just use some default thing that's shipped with some icon font thing you downloaded from somewhere on the web, I almost promise you it's not doing all the right stuff that is necessary for accessibility with that icon font. Whereas most of like an SVG icon system, it's just easier to impart accessibility in it. An SVG tag can have a title, and you can say ARIA labeled by that title, and it will just, you tab over to it, and it can explain what that icon is. Open menu, and it'll just read it, and it's like, oh, that's nice. That's a little trickier to pull off with an icon font, not to mention fallbacks and all that. Usually SVG is thought of as more accessible than whatever it is it's replacing.
Cool.
But this also goes to sort of the tooling issue of SVG, right? I mean, we have tools that can create SVGs today for us, but if we're not taking care of sort of the way that we optimize those SVGs and prepare them for the web or for whatever use case we may have for them, you don't necessarily get all that for free, right? I mean, from an editor standpoint, I know Sarah Sudown has sort of talked about this a lot in terms of, you know, best practices and tips for designers. Because at the end of the day, you know, a lot of times when we talk about the web, it's working within a team that says, hey, I need an asset for X that's going to fit within this design. Can you output that thing? And that output, even on SVG land, if you've ever outputted anything from, you know, an Adobe tool suite or whatever, can be a little heavy and unoptimized.
Sure, there's ways to screw that up for sure. In fact, we just wrote a little bit about it on CSS Tricks. Like, I don't know, Illustrator, for example, which is a super popular way. I'm sure a lot of us have it or whatever. You open a graphic in Illustrator, you can just save as from Illustrator as an SVG file. It's right next to .ai. It's .svg. Illustrator is like a first-class citizen in Illustrator, is SVG. And if you do that and then just ship it on the web, yeah, you're doing a huge disservice to people, because that format is like, it's almost weird they even, I'm not even 100% sure why they offer that at all, because it's so full of, I mean, it's easy just to say garbage, because it's like, it's full of metadata information. It has this weird doc type on it. And more than that, it supports like a ton of proprietary Illustrator features that have nothing to do with the web at all. And an example I use often is guides, the little blue up and down things, right? You're working on a document and you're lining stuff up and you're using guides. When you save as SVG from Illustrator, it saves that guide information. And it's good that it does, because the users of Illustrator expect when they double-click that file or drag it onto the Illustrator icon again, that it's going to open up with all that information where it is, all the artboards that were there, all the guides that were there, all this proprietary stuff that has nothing to do with the web, but has everything to do with that document should be there. Now, Adobe's not done. This isn't a slight on Adobe. It's an education issue. Adobe Illustrator also offers export as SVG, and when you export as SVG, it strips all that stuff away. There's no metadata. There's no guide information. There's no weird doc type. It's pretty well web optimized. I mean, you can drop it onto, there's Svg Optimizers, a popular one's called SVGO. You might still get some benefit after running it through there, but today, like the Illustrator that I'm running right now, the Creative Suite 2017, when you export SVG from it, the true like file export as SVG is totally web ready. And it's drastic. I just looked at 2 files yesterday. The CSS Tricks logo, which is just a really simple text logo that it's been converted to outlines. The save as version of it from Illustrator is 400 some kilobytes, like half a megabyte almost. And the exported one is 3 kilobytes. It's over 2 orders of magnitude larger. So yeah, it's an education issue. You could screw up. Like here, oh, Chris told me to save as SVG, so because the SVG is a more efficient format. It is if it's correctly output for the web.
No, and you're right. The tooling has gotten better. I mean, Adobe did put that in to CC.
It hasn't been that long.
It's only been about a year, because now it's file export SVG, and then you can strip it.
And it's a great tool. It just changed. I think this 2017 only dropped a few weeks ago, I think, and it's different now than it was in the last version. So.
Yeah. And there are tools online that you can even use, right? Jake Archibald's got, SVG OMG, which is, a great little progressive web app. That
one's cool because you can see what you're doing with it or whatever. It's just based on SVGO, though, which can be a part of anything. You can have a desktop app that uses SVGO. You can have it be part of your Gulp build. It could be anything. And even if you take that 400 kilobyte one and drop it in SVGO, it's still going to do a pretty good job. It's going to strip out all those features and stuff. So even if you screwed that up, but you did make sure that you knew about SVG optimization and you used a tool like that, you'd still be in pretty good shape.
Do you feel like developers are understanding more of this today? I mean, obviously, you talk with a lot of developers. You're part of the great web community we've sort of been building up for years. Do you see people sort of starting to embrace SVG as this thing that can solve a lot of the sort of, not necessarily best practices that we used in the past? Icon fonts being sort of a workaround among workarounds.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say yes, because it's actually been, I don't know, it's going on 3 years where like all the conferences I go to, I give some kind of SVG talk, and there's, you mentioned Sarah Swaydan, she's been doing it. There's a lot of people talking about it and kind of extolling the benefits of it. So I don't think there's any shortage of evangelism for it on one hand, and on the other hand, I think there's totally a lack of evangelism or something, because it's not, I don't think it's clicking as much as it could be. Like, I keep giving talks about it, and I don't see the whole ship of web development turning to embrace SVG yet. Like, I don't know, or maybe I just don't have enough data or whatever, but I keep giving talks about it, and people are just like, I think I'm going to try to get my work to shift the logo to SVG. And I'm like, that's so awesome. Good. Please, yes, do that. Take a baby step into it. But holy crap, still, like, it's, I don't know where we're at on it. I still want to beat the drum, because the world is ready for it. I promise I'm not steering people in the wrong direction. SVG is a good idea, and it's slow to take.
Well, and with the image format sort of landscape that we've got, now we have like picture, and from an element standpoint that gives us art direction. You've got source set that, I can just gen a whole bunch of things and use them, and that works great for really specific cases. But the problem is there are a lot of cases, and in terms of the way developers sort of see that landscape, I think that can be somewhat difficult. well, I only need this one little tiny thing, right? Because I'm only shipping for this one platform, and I have one screen size. And they have a very narrow sort of piped view of, oh, this is my sort of land o web. And that can be very limiting from a, number one, learning standpoint, because you're not seeing the grander picture of the way people use your application. But it also can be hard, right? I mean, we've got, how do you optimize for all these different cases? Because they're not all the same, right? I'm not going to convert my JPEG into an SVG. I suppose I could, I feel like, very, artistic.
Well, you mentioned tooling. That's a big part of it. The tools have to be there for people, and they're getting better. I mean, Illustrator's export is pretty good. Even Photoshop has some SVG exporting possibilities right now. When it's a first-class citizen, like we see in Sketch, you can select an element, and the idea is to okay, I need to export that as a graphic somehow. You just say make exportable in Sketch, and it's like, what format do you want it in? Do you want it in PNG, JPEG, SVG, whatever you want? Just tell me, and that's how I'll export it. That's the direction Illustrator is going to. We mentioned export as, but it has, in 2017, it has cool features where you can drag. You have this little panel, and you can drag bits of your image onto the panel. And says, oh, I see. You want that to be like an exportable part of this whole. And it has the same thing Sketch has. What format do you want it in? PNG, SVG, JPEG, all three? 2x, 4x, whatever you want. As soon as you've set that up, you just hit export, and it gives it to you in all those formats. So the tools need to kind of catch up to the use if we want it to happen. I also like focusing on things that people just need. Like, so many sites have an SVG icon system, and that's kind of why I've focused on that a bit and explaining how that can work in SVG, because there's this moment where developers building a site, oh, it's icon time. Like, if we can catch a developer right at that moment and be like, let me show you the SVG way, because it has all these benefits and it's just as easy as any other way. And also catch them how they already work a little bit. So I think a lot of companies work and designers work in I'm going to have one Illustrator file. There's going to be 30 artboards on it, and they're going to be, those are all my icons, and I just want some method of just exporting that into a way that the developers who are working on the site can use it, or I'm going to use it later when I'm implementing those icons. Or I just have a folder in our project with those 30 icons, and they're all just sitting in there as individual .svg files. And I just want some way to kind of automate the system of making those available for use as icons. That absolutely exists. That's kind of how people already work. So if we can be like, oh, I see how you work. Let me show you how to turn that into an SVG icon system. Sometimes people are all ears, and I have seen evidence of that being a lot more popular than it ever used to be.
So could you talk a little bit about how SVG icon systems work? How does it compare to the icon font kind of stuff? What's the story there? How do front-end developers kind of consume SVGs in that way?
There's kind of I wanted to make sure I had a strong points on this, because it comes up all the time, right? Like I use icon fonts. Why would I switch? Kind of thing. And the answer is it's not tricky. I think inline SVG icon systems are just better in almost every way. The few ways that they're not better is one thing is, if you already have a site it's working great on, and it's been around for years and nobody seems to have any big problems with it, you're not going to get a whole lot by ripping that out and going through the kind of development pain of switching systems, just for the fun of it or whatever. Maybe some big redesign comes along, sure, make it part of it, but don't go home and rip out your whole icon font system just for this, because whatever. But or if we talked about IE8 being a non-support thing, IE8 supports almost none of SVG. Same with Android 2.3. IE8 came out in 2011 or something, so it's been a hot while. It's almost 2017, but still, your browser, your users and your browser analytics better than I do or anybody on this podcast does. You have your own analytics. If you're serving a lot of customers that are on IE8, IE8 does support icon fonts and custom fonts. So if that's a big target for you, cool. I can imagine a CMS that needs to support a huge swath of the paths of the web sticking with icon fonts because they need to support IE8 still or whatever. That's fine. But so that's that. But anything else that you can compare, I think SVG is the winner. I think they look better than icons. Icon fonts are kind of subject to, in some browsers, some anti-aliasing type of stuff that's more specific to text than they are as just normal vector art. They can look a lot better. You have in the world of fonts, it's like, how much space does the A in the word and, like, can you picture the box around the A? That box around the A is subject to all kinds of stuff: letter spacing, word spacing, line height, just the arbitrary vector box in which the font was created itself, kerning information. There's so much, like, you don't know exactly where the top of the box of an A is. So, like, just like you don't know an A, you don't know where the top of an arrow is either in an icon font, because it's hard to know. So if you want to align that on the absolute top with something else in an icon font, that you play this like nudging game of figuring out how that works. Whereas in SVG, you have a box. You're looking at the box in which it was created when you're in Illustrator or whatever other software you're using. So you design your fonts to be like, no, that's the top of the box, and now I can put the arrow up against that, or I can make sure that it's consistent with all my other icons. The designing system is better, I think. Icon fonts also can fail in weird ways. I've kind of detailed a bunch of things that are font specific, kind of like fonts used to be they're subject to CORS rules, but even that was different in some browsers, and there's bugs that have propped up over time that force them to load in weird ways. Browsers are always trying to do weird stuff with fonts, because it's just a hot topic these days, how do fonts load that hasn't shaken out yet. So I feel weird about having my icon system be part of that world. I'd rather have it just work or not work. I think that the tooling around SVG icon systems is even if it's less known, is better, I think. And we could go all into that, but why not? There's the accessibility thing where it's like I can just put a title on the, if I have a build system that's set up and I'm thinking about accessibility as a developer, I can make that work better. The accessibility just kind of comes along for the ride. There's less things to mistake, and I don't know. I could just go on and on, but I think, like, if you're looking at a chart of like which one of these two things is better, it's like SVG wins, SVG wins, SVG wins, SVG wins, except for super old browser support is like the main.
Yeah, and there's a section in your book building an icon system as well. So if people really want to figure out how to go and do this stuff, then get the book.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, it's one of my biggest selling points for the book, everybody out there, because I have information about it that's a bit scattered on CSS tricks and stuff. I've yet to make like my ultimate seminal, this is what I think a good SVG icon system is, exactly step by step what to think about as one article. I haven't done that. It is in the book, though. So if you want to read the book, that's cool. We didn't mention, there's other SVG icon systems like Grunticon out there, too, that are absolutely worth looking at, that are kind of a complete SVG icon system thing. And I always like to shout out to that. I have a slight philosophical difference with Grunticon's approach, which is no big deal. And you can still use Grunticon together with the system I promote, but that's worth looking at as well.
The web is not about philosophical differences.
Isn't it? Oh, good.
So along, kind of sticking to the same, getting a little bit more specific, but about the font stuff. So, excuse me. People in general are used to, like, everybody's pretty used to sprite sheets and how they work and how you interact with them, and also the same with icon fonts. So say you use Icon Moon or anything else, which you can also use for SVGs if you use Icon Moon. But people know how that works. It's like, okay, I have some styles. It's importing the font here, and now I just have to put this class on whatever element I've deemed are going to be my icon classes, whether they're spans or anything. Everybody already knows how that works. When you're dealing with SVG icons, or SVGs in general, but specifically with icons, the way you work with them is a little bit different. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on how you actually work with them?
Yeah. So what, if everybody knows, what is it that they already know? If it's a CSS sprite, it's a span or a div you set a width or a height on it, and you get some complicated numbers like background size and background position and stuff that move some image around to reveal just the bit that you're trying to reveal. Fine. So you learned that at some point. You learned how that works, or you have some tool that does it. If you have an icon font, perhaps that icon font has some build tool, and the build tool suggests to you whenever you want to use this font, you put an I element there, which is just some arbitrary thing that means italic text, but hey, let's use that for an icon for some reason. And then it has some CSS attached to it that was also generated by a build tool. Perhaps it inserts that with a pseudo element on that I tag that is set to a specific font, which is the icon font that was created, and an icon appears there that's attached to that I element somehow. You had to learn that. You had to be kind of taught that. There was some code provided to you that you copy and pasted or whatever. The SVG icon system isn't all that different. It's just when you come to that moment that you want to put the icon somewhere, instead of it being a div or a span or an I tag or whatever, it's an SVG element. And there's like maybe a little bit more code to it because there might have to be something inside that SVG element, the use tag. The use tag has a URL to it that points to where that symbol is defined, which is the element that says this is an icon in SVG. And then that's it. You're good to go. And so you're like, oh, okay, it looks like a little bit more code. It has an SVG tag, and it might have some like namespace on it. Maybe it might have this xlink href tag in the use, which is a weird looking thing. It's not. That doesn't look normal to me. And it has this URL path in it, and rather than just having a class, it has like an ID selector and some stuff. It looks a little different, but it's just a matter of learning that. I mean, to me, that looks better and just as natural as. And in fact, when I see an I tag, I'm like, ugh. I always hated how they used I as the thing for fonts instead of a meaningless span. It's like this icon isn't italic. Ugh. It's just a matter of learning the new thing. And then it's like, oh, well, all I did was throw an I tag in there and the font appeared. That's so much easier. Well, that's a telltale sign of you're doing it wrong, I hate to say. But that means that there's the way to accessibly implement an actual icon font involves having some child elements in there as well, so that you can use the proper like ARIA tags for hiding it and revealing alternate content and stuff, because CSS alone can't really do the alternate content thing that well. And so by the time you're like have the complete HTML for like a really accessible icon system, you have just as much or more HTML involved than you do in the SVG system.
Like I feel like sometimes we build stuff for the web because we're like, I really need to do something because I have this problem, and we're like, here's a stopgap. I don't know that I know personally I was never really particularly pleased.
Stoked on icon fonts? I have to say that we may be, I wasn't either, so we're on the same team, but I have to tell you there's people that are willing to fight us about this. Freaking love icon fonts, dude. This is a hard fight.
No, you're right. I think it is a hard fight. It just never really felt like the good thing to do, particularly because of the way we understand fonts to load anyhow. Like, it was always one of those things, is it going to work today? Like, I felt like that's a bad thing to ask, whether production's going to work today.
No, but it's a legit question. Is it going to work today? It's legit. There was a day that Chrome dropped this weird icon font bug thing. They shipped it, and it had something weird to do with cores or whatever and how icon fonts loaded, and all kinds of sites had broken icon fonts because of this little bug. So that was a legit concern. Like, oh, we broke a million sites, just because it was a hack that wasn't thought about it. There's more nuance to this. I've heard arguments of things that icon fonts can be better at. The way that like WAF2 compresses stuff can be pretty compelling. You can I've seen like scales weighted, like here's 30 icons in an SVG icons and here's 30 icons in WAF2, and look how much smaller the WAF2 kind of thing is. So I didn't necessarily fairly present every possible detail of this, but I got to tell you, I think the future of icon systems is SVG, regardless.
How dare you not go through the entire history of icon fonts, Chris? I mean, it's just such a small,
we gave you an
tiny topic.
You know what?
We
you know what we should do quick, though? This is worth talking about really quick, is that I just said that the future of icon system is an SVG icon system. I actually don't think that's true. It's not, and it looks like there's something in the show notes too. This HTTP2 is coming. The actual future of icon fonts is probably going to be image source equals a link to an individual icon and some alt text. And the reason that we don't do that now is because, let's say you really do have 30 icons on one particular page, which is really not that many. Like, go to GitHub or something, there's maybe 30 on any given page. There's a lot of sites that are very heavy on their icon usage, which is fine. We're looking at a Google Docs right now. Just count how many are on there. There's probably at least 20 or so. We don't do that because 20 icon requests on an individual page is bad news for performance. It's got, especially on ones with bad ping times and stuff, or however that works. We're taught over and over and over with web performance that reducing the number of requests is such a big deal for performance. As far as I understand it, that's true in HTTP 1 and not so much in HTTP 2. If you have a whole bunch of requests from the same domain that are all being requested in like one document, that like it's not that big of a deal if they're split up between multiple files. I'm not an expert on this, but it seems like that's the future of that. And I think smashing all your icons into one file is going to become an anti-pattern, because it means that if you change one icon, that you've invalidated the cache on 19 or others, whereas that won't be the case. Now you change one icon, you invalidate the cache on that single file, which is going to be a more efficient system. So the future of icon systems is going to get a lot easier, fortunately.
If anybody is curious, Google Docs is using sprite sheets.
Oh, raster graphics?
Yeah, all their stuff they're using right now is look to be sprite sheets.
Yeah, it does. So top 2002 pixels, position absolute, height 3,687 pixels. Look, the sprite sheet itself is 84 pixels wide by 7,374 pixels tall.
Wow.
Which takes a lot of memory and stuff. It's like Google's smarter than me, so like whatever. Like I'm sure they know what they're doing. But it does seem like, and there's colors involved here. Although that's one thing that SVG icon systems provides that we didn't even mention, is the fact that a glyph of a font can be one color. An SVG can be anything. It could be animated. It could have interactivity. It can just do anything that SVG. But it's also, it's an icon too. Multicolor being a trivially easy thing that an icon system can do.
Yeah, and that is something. And that right there, I think, is actually one of the things that a lot of front end devs will be able to appreciate, because I know I've had many conversations with designers and stuff like that, where it's like, okay, well, how many different versions of this? There's this one icon. There are these icons for these different buttons. These buttons have 3 different states, and it used to be that you have to be like, okay, well, I need you to provide me with the light one and the dark one and the a mid one or something like that.
Yeah, you hover over it, and it's got a shift background position to the other one.
Yeah, and icon fonts helped with that a little bit, because you could change the color. Like that, very flatly, you could change the overall color. But still then, you would still...
background color or scale, or there's a few things you can do.
But the other thing that you run into then is just, if depending on what the design is, you can only change it to one color. Like if you have the lines, you can only change it to one color. If they want it to be multiples for different reasons, that's one thing that just you cannot do with a font, and something that you can do with an SVG, because you can target the different quote unquote physical sections of the SVG with CSS to change stuff.
Yep. And that's a nuanced topic in itself, but yeah, it's very compelling, I think.
Yeah. Oh yes, I'm dramatically oversimplifying everything, but it's just something that I know that I have run into several times in the book.
Mostly I think of so a lot of the ways that I use an SVG icon system today is to have my folder full of SVGs and run them through a build tool and get this chunk of SVG, which is representative of all the icons on my site, and then I, for the most part, just include it in all the HTML document that gets sent. So there's just this big chunk of code that is how you draw all these icons that's right in the HTML, rather than link to it as a separate resource. Like, there's different ways to do this. You can AJAX for that file and have it come down so it's kind of async, and it can be cached separately than the HTML is. But if you do that, that can be the same way. The other way to do it that I think is kind of the coolest way to do it is to not include this big chunk in anywhere, AJAX for it or anything, but just to link to, in the used element, you can say, I'm going to not just link to the ID of where it's referenced within this document, but give a full file path like you would for a JPEG or whatever else. And what's cool about that is that, then it can be cached, and then you're not like injecting this big chunk of code into the DOM or whatever. But then you kind of lose the ability to do what you're saying, that you can use CSS to hover over it and then kind of have access to the circles and the lines and the colors and stuff, because now there's this like shadow DOM boundary in the way that doesn't kind of let you do things in the same way, and that can be a little like disenchanting to people. So fair warning.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we are starting to run out of time. Chris, or I guess anybody. Did anybody have any last questions, thoughts, comments, or whatever about anything with SVGs?
I feel like I didn't see enough turkey SVGs for the holiday this week here in the States. I just feel like there just weren't enough.
Straight to Santa SVGs. It's unbelievable.
There's no shortage of them there. It's another one of the kind of beauties of SVG is that you can, anything that you find on the web that's vector. You find some site that has it as an EPS file, or it's embedded in a PDF or whatever. It's like anything that you can open in Illustrator can be SVG. Sometimes I see people like, oh, I need a turkey SVG, so they Google for turkey SVG, and you don't really need to do that. It can be turkey vector.
Is it sad that I could almost draw a turkey better in math than I can with my hand? I feel like to some extent I'm like, oh, this really works out for us. But then on the other hand, you're like, oh, I am not good at the design. This is not at my forte.
It might just be how slowly and methodically you approach it. You go too fast with your hand. Slow down.
One other thing that I do want to point out is if anybody is just curious about cool things that people are doing with SVGs, CodePen is actually a really good place to go. Not to just plug another one of Chris's things, but they will put up some very, very cool stuff, anything to do with front end, and you can find a lot of really interesting SVG anythings that people are playing around with.
Yeah, you can. There's plenty of examples of people experimenting and stuff. And obviously I'm the biggest sucker in the world for that stuff. Like I want to see your SVG experiment. I'm of two minds though, of course. Like not that I'm worried about it, but like I don't like to think of SVG necessarily as just like this place where you experiment with fancy stuff, but you can't really use it in reality. Like, no, you can though. That's the thing, So don't think of. I even have a collection on SVG called SVG Fancy Town. So if you just Google SVG Fancy Town, you'll see hundreds of packs of just amazing stuff people can do in SVG. That not much of it is looks like stuff that you just toss on a production website kind of thing. Although there's no reason why not. But it's more like just an animation experiment kind of thing. But yeah, there's no need to think of SVG necessarily as this, fancy only.
Yeah.
It can be very practical as well,
Practical SVG.
I think Fancy SVG is your next book title. I'm just saying.
It could be. Non-practical SVG.
Teacup, pinky out. This is how I do my SVG. Always pinky out. Just very
and with that, and that's exactly why I know that it's about time to wrap up. So, Chris, thank you very, very much for coming on. SVGs are a really, really fascinating topic, and one that I personally don't know much about in a very practical way, because I do just tend to Google, it's like, what weird stuff are people doing? So it's really good to see a book like you're putting out that is just like, okay, this is what they are good for. This is how you do it, and these are the benefits that you get from it. So if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, view any of your work, any of that kind of stuff, how can we find you? Twitter, GitHub, CodePen, all that good stuff.
Yeah, all three of those things I'm somewhat active on, and I use my full name, Chris, Coyer is my last name, Chris Coyier on Twitter and GitHub and Dribble and CodePen and all of those things. Happy to hear from anybody ever. It's chriscoyier.net is actually my personal website, which links out to those things. Perfectly good way to reach me as well.
Awesome. Well, so again, Chris, thank you very much. And Leon and Justin, thanks for being on to chat about a bunch of cool web stuff, as always. And with that, this was episode 100 and crap, 16. It was episode 116, Practical SVG.
Congratulations, y'all, on the trucking along this long. Over 100 is no joke.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. I was once you said which episode you were on last, I was like, oh man, we have been doing this for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, and thanks to everybody for continuing to listen to us for 100+ episodes. And we will talk to everybody next week.
Happy holidays.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at +the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.